What's up, guys? Hope you're feeling alive right now. I'm Micah Keneally, and I want to welcome you to Young Adults Today podcast, where we talk about reaching young adults in our world today. And like always, I'm joined by my husband and co-host, Josiah. How are you doing today?
Doing great. It's fun to be in our home in the studio today and learning and having conversations. And I'm a curious person. So I love asking the questions, getting asked some questions to stay on my toes. But how are you, babe?
I'm doing great. We've had some warm weather here up in Minnesota, which is crazy. It's like 98 degrees with like 95% humidity, and praise God, it's raining right now. So it's kind of like that sigh of relief where you can like feel your soul be rejuvenated again. And be in the studio is also a blast and something that we get to do today. And Josiah, we have new episodes coming out. For those of you who are tuning in, Josiah, can you tell them how they can get involved, what they can look forward to, and anything that you want to share?
Definitely. Every Monday, we just like this. If you're like me, we're made for Mondays. And at the same time, it's like the struggle can be real sometimes. So we want to help you start your week off strong and start it off right with new episodes, fresh content every Monday morning early. Thanks for subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show and sharing it with listeners who would be working with young adults, passionate about the next generation. That's kind of our whole heart, right, babe?
It's so true. And we have an amazing guest. I know you've been following this individual.
Definitely.
And I believe they follow you back. And you have just been so excited and stoked about this specific episode that we get to embark upon today. So without further ado, do you want to at least give a glimpse of who in the world is behind the other microphone today?
Definitely. We're joined, and I'll introduce him in just a second, but we're joined by Paul Burns. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. Good to see you guys. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course. And for those of you who don't know, aren't connected yet, the key word is yet. Paul is a believer, builder, maker, dreamer, a husband and father who happens to work at Twitter. Yeah, I said it. Twitter, like our favorite app, social media. And man, I think this, and I'll just say it from my perspective. I love being a light in a place that's dark. And I think that quite honestly, social media has a tendency that however we want to use it, we can use it, whether we get sucked into maybe a circle that's toxic or a dark place. I just want to be an encouragement to those who are having a tough day, and was honored, Paul, to stumble across just following you and get connected online. And I thought it'd be so fun because I believe this generation is globally connected, digitally connected, and you even have a passion of hashtag Twitter faith. So we'll get to dive into all things of faith and technology and social media, but would you just mind kicking us off by sharing some of your story with us today?
Yeah. So good to be here, and thanks for having me. So my name's Paul Burns. We met, you and I, Josiah, on Twitter, which is cool. We're meeting in real life right now, which is great. So I grew up in a small town. I went to church as a kid, and I always thought that it was, frankly, just a boring thing you do on a Sunday. That was my interpretation of what faith was. And my dad owned a manufacturing company when I was a kid. And so from a very early age, I used to work at his factory in the summer. And, I became obsessed with business, with launching new things, with making something from nothing, with maybe wrapped into that was this idea of success. I was kind of obsessed with this idea from a very early age. I just remember feeling that. And as I grew up and, learned how to, do things in life and figure out how to think about business, I just became obsessed with my career. I threw myself into my career. I worked really hard. And I was just focused on advancing and moving up and just getting that next promotion. And, I kind of it kind of took over my life. And I along the way, totally abandoned my faith, and I became obsessed with just what a career meant. And so I ended up working for a lot of tech companies, a lot of media companies, a lot of, creative companies. And, I would say within all of that, there was this just relentless pursuit of me at the end of the day. And, fast forward, a decade or so, I have a family, I have a couple kids, but I was predominantly focused on me, on my life, on what I was trying to accomplish. And everything else was secondary. And the relationship with my wife, was not great. The kids that I had, that I still have at the time, I was distant from them. I kind of became removed. I was traveling on an airplane all the time. I was in hotels all the time. And, some days I would call home to check on my family. Some days I wouldn't. And so my life, the success that I was striving towards was almost more important to me than anything else. And then something happened to me. I was running an agency, and it was a creative agency. It was a design agency. It was a product development agency. And I had started this agency, and we didn't have any clients. I was in the basement, renting space from a basement of another company. And I felt confident enough in my own ability, in my own strength, in my own intelligence that, it's all going to work out. I kind of, that sort of Kevin Costner Field of Dreams approach. It's if you build it, they will come. I started hiring a ton of people. I hired, way more people than I probably should have, with the anticipation that things will work itself out. I'm confident in myself. And the sad reality is clients didn't show up right away. And I went a month without any clients. I went 2 months without any clients. I went 3 months without any clients. And I started to get really concerned. I had hired all these people without any revenue. And I think I did everything I could in my power to try and drum up new revenue. I was pitching business like crazy. I was burning myself out. And then, this like shocking realization occurred to me that I may have to shut this whole thing down. I may not be able to continue with this thing. And maybe we overinvested. I don't know, but maybe I'm not cut out for this entrepreneurial lifestyle. But all of this, again, I was just so obsessed with myself and this whole pursuit of myself. And I think what I didn't realize at the time was that God was pursuing me during that whole lifespan of me pursuing myself. I was rejecting him 1,000 times, but he was still pursuing me. And one morning I came into the office, and it was like 6 a.m. It was dark. No one else was there. And I just got down on my knees, and I cried, and I prayed, and I cried out to God in a moment of desperation, that I just don't know what to do. And I can't do this on my own. And I need you to take over, and I need your help. And I admitted, I think for the first time, that it's not about me. I can't do this. I need you. I need you, Jesus. I need you, God. And I don't even know if I knew what I was saying at the time, if I'm being honest, but I think God uses those desperate moments, those moments where we come to the end of ourself to reveal who he is, and to reveal how faith actually starts to work. And that was a moment, kind of a turning point. And I just had a peace about things after that moment, a peace that God would kind of figure itself out. God would figure out my scenario. He would figure out the plan for my life. And so I started talking to God again. I started, reacquainting myself with this father who I had kind of abandoned for, a couple decades. And I think I found a church, and I got connected to a bunch of people who were also trying to find out who they were. And so anyway, all of this to say is that I found God in a moment of desperation, and built this agency up into one of the fastest growing agencies in the market. And we ended up getting a ton of clients and hiring, 5 times as many people. And I think it was a very real eye-opening moment that when we minimize ourselves, when we hand things over to God, when we think about the trials and the challenges of the day, and we recognize that we're not going through this on our own, and that we can actually put our faith and our trust in him. sometimes the most incredible fighting position is on our knees. And I think I found that in that moment. And so anyway, that's a bit of my story. And now I work at Twitter. I'm an executive there, and I do a bunch of things there, and I'm just excited to be learning what it means to know him more, know God more, learning what it means to share my faith in the workplace, and learning what it means to have a conversation about perhaps the thing that matters most in life. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do every day, is just show up and represent Jesus in a place that may be far from it.
So good. Paul, thank you for being real and authentic and just going there and sharing so many different layered dynamics of your story that I think many of our listeners can relate to, whether they're in a role of leadership or pastoralship or volunteering, interning, whatever that is and looks like. There's so many things to be discovered about Christ. And sometimes when we are the most lost, we are the most found, meaning like you get on your knees and you identify the fact that, wow, apart from God, I can't do anything. Where am I supposed to go? There's only up from here. And I think sometimes when we feel like we're in that miry pit, like we just need to look up and God's hand has always been there. Like you said, like God was chasing me or pursuing me this entire time, even though I was constantly rejecting him. And I think many of us as leaders, myself included, and this is something I always want to keep my heart in check with, is having the fleshly desire to further our own kingdom in our own strength versus glorifying God and building his kingdom in that process.
Wow.
And I think sometimes we need to have those people around us, that church body around us, those young men and women who are going to call us out and going to call us up, the faculty and staff members that are holding up our arms, and we're all recognizing the fact that we're all on the same team. And so for our listeners today, if you find yourself really wrestling with whose kingdom are you building, are you running to God or are you running with God? And Paul, I just want to say thank you for going there.
Definitely.
And recognizing that you are now in a significant role within in Twitter, and you had alluded to it prior to even me phrasing this question. And I just get to get up and share my faith in a dark world that probably needs it most. And what has it been like, Paul, for you to like harness that passion for Christ in the workplace while remaining true to what God's called you to and remaining professional? Because I think that's a tension. We have some marketplace people listening in addition to pastors, but really managing that tension healthfully and doing it well, where people will want to lean into a Christ conversation versus lean out. So how has it been like working at Twitter and trying to manage, maintain balance and remain faithful, if that's a mouthful right there?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think I used to believe that there was a work version of me, there was a home version of me, there was a a friend version of me, and I think God just wants you to be you and be comfortable with who you are, and be totally honest that, hey, I'm a work in progress and I don't have it all figured out, and I'm still deeply curious and trying to understand this thing called life the same way everyone else is. And so I think I've tried to really, I used to be super self-conscious about just even sharing my faith. And it's funny, like as I started to do it, I started actually just declare that, simple things like, hey, what'd you do on the weekend? Being able to declare that, oh, I went to church in the morning, and people would spark a conversation. Oh, really? You go to church? Tell me more about that. Little things like that were just small, insignificant, but maybe powerful reveals that people that opened up a conversation with others that maybe they hadn't expected. We started this thing at Twitter called Twitter Faith. There's a big conversation around inclusion and diversity in corporate America and corporate culture. And, I think when you think about faith, really that's about what, irrespective of what you believe, you should be able to be comfortable talking about that. And you should be able to bring your whole self to work. And so, so I think part of that theory is that, we should be able to do that with faith too, and talk about our faith and talk about what we care about and what we believe. And if faith is how we make sense of the world and how we make sense of decisions and relationships and how we make sense of how we lead people, we should be talking about this stuff, and not in a way that's trying to, like, there's no agenda behind it. I'm not trying to convince someone of something, but I am trying to be honest with who I am and what I believe. And so I think in many ways, it just became a very freeing moment to be able to talk about this stuff openly at work. And, Josiah, you mentioned Twitter Faith, and, this is a group we started at Twitter, and it's a group of faith-based people who, want to talk about faith. And I think there's like amazing things that come out of that, the ability to have open conversations about why people believe certain things that they believe, a willingness to explore, aspects of faith that may seem very controversial and taboo, but also a chance to pray for our leaders and acknowledge that, hey, they're making some really tough, big decisions in the world right now that maybe, prayer and, careful intercession and, the power of God may actually be a helpful thing in that decision-making process. And so we get together and we pray for our leaders. And it's just a cool thing to be able to do that, and to be able to do it with a bunch of your colleagues in a place that, most people kind of don't see as a, quote unquote Christian organization. And so, I think that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm not trying to get hyper spiritual with people or, like overthink it. I think it's really just like, how do I show up every day and love people like Jesus would? Mm-hmm. How do I see the potential in people versus maybe a checkered past? How do I, approach them in a way that's like unconditional love, without any sort of agenda to try and get them to do something? And I think, people see authenticity. People know when you're real, and people know when you're trying to sell them something, and when you just care about them because you care about them. And so, and if it produces a conversation with people where they're curious about, hey, why do you believe that? And what's that thing that you keep talking about? And when I post on Twitter and all my staff look at that and go, I don't understand that thing you're talking about when you're talking about Jesus, when you post, what does that mean? Like I kind of invite some of those questions, like I invite people, like people may not fully get it or understand what it means to have a surrendered life, or to have a life that is, totally focused on, Jesus as the Messiah. Like for a lot of people, that's like, there's a whole bunch of baggage that comes with that. And, all I'm really trying to do is to just like, share my faith openly, but also hopefully it prompts people to ask some questions and we can talk about it. But I don't want to get too caught up in it being like a preachy thing. It's not. I'm not trying to preach. I'm not trying to convert anyone. I'm just trying to love people. And, the Bible says they will know us by our love. And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to do day to day.
That's good.
Paul, that spark of motive is something that you're talking about, of like, why are you doing this? Why? That's a great question, by the way, to ask anytime we post anything. What's my motive behind this? Why am I posting this? And I think that the motive of just genuinely loving people, that is a pure motive. And we live in a world that is so busy, especially digital world, tech, startups, or app spaces. Everything's just so lightning speed, 5G, and they're working on the next to advance the speed. But I love this quote that kind of slows down my soul, that kind of describes everything you were just saying about Twitter faith. It's from A.W. Tozer, and it says, "It is not what a man does that determines whether his work is sacred or secular. It is why he does it." And
so good.
First of all, just love A.W. Tozer. Second of all, like, this whole sacred and secular divide is something that we are complete whole beings, financial, emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, relational, and vocational. There's all different parts of our lives that are formed and kind of melded together. And so when there's a divide between, this is the sacred side of me and this is the secular side of me, or this is my Sunday life, church life, and then this is my work life. I think that disconnect is something that a lot of young people, young leaders really wrestle with, asking also questions of meaning and purpose. And I know that Micah and I are really passionate about two things. One is the faith of the next generation, and also meeting them in a place where they're at, and where it happens to be, quite honestly, is their phones, digitally, technology, with social media, with things like podcasts or YouTube, and the
True.
online space and vehicle of really, it can be a way that we can connect with people. And I've lived a life, Paul, where most of my life I've followed Jesus. My life was really radically impacted as a 16-year-old, deciding that it wasn't my parents' faith, it was my faith, was my own. And so the people that I went to high school with, some of them still follow me on Twitter and on Facebook. And then I've met people from Hong Kong or just in an airport, and we happen to exchange handles, have a good conversation. And then it's weird how there's also people that maybe I haven't met yet, but I followed, or they followed me. And it's just such a beautiful space to be who we are, and who God's called us to be is on social media. But following that up, I would just love to know from your angle, working in the tech space, working with Twitter, what are you seeing, Paul, when it comes to the faith of the next generation of maybe 18 to 30-year-olds in their lives, in social media, but also just in general?
Yeah. I am so hopeful for the next generation, their purpose, their role, their mission. I think what I see, and this just might be my own perspective, but what I see is that a generation of people seeking authenticity, seeking what's real. And I don't think, I think the next generation is growing tired of the fakeness, the posturing, the very beautifully, carefully curated lives on social media. I think people just want to be really real. And I think, we all have our insecurities. We all want to be loved. We all want to know, who we are, why we're here. And even if we don't, know how to express that question that's in our mind, I think it's there beneath the surface. And we all want to be known intimately by someone, something. And I think that, so I think a lot of people, when you think about the next generation, are on a hunt for a feeling, of, worthiness, a feeling that they're known, that they're important, or at the very basic level that they're just understood, and that someone is hearing me. And so, and if I think about my own life and my team, and just the next generation of people that I see on Twitter, if we're not careful, we can look for love in all the wrong places, and our feelings can speak louder than the truth about our lives in many ways. And so when we start to live by feelings and be seeking those feelings of assuredness that you get from 1,000 likes on Twitter or Instagram, we can so desperately want that affirmation that that our happiness and our joy is defined by our circumstance. And that's what I see as a watch out for the next generation, that we are as good as how we're doing. And the situation that we're in, the circumstances that we are in, will determine our outlook on life. But I think when we live by faith, and when we have a solid rock foundation, despite what life throws at us, we can be unshakable amidst the circumstances of our life. And I think that's what we're called to be. And that's something deeper. That's where you get to the realness and the truth and the power of the gospel, where you strip away the lights and the smoke and the skinny jeans and the cool factor of a service, and you get to the real raw root of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And you get to a place where you're like, this thing is like profound. It is like a earth-shattering, redefining moment for an individual if you really listen. So for me, I think, Jesus is the real deal. And he's like he is truth made cellular in many ways. And so I think once people get a hold of that, the honest, the authentic realness of who Jesus is, and who he's called you to be, I think, that cuts through all the other stuff, and then you kind of ask yourself, what am I seeking? Am I seeking community? Am I seeking a feeling of happiness? Am I seeking a moment, or am I seeking, everlasting peace? Am I seeking joy that just doesn't stop? Am I seeking a reason for getting up in the morning that is beyond my own personal pleasure? So I think about the gospel, and it's more relevant today than it's ever been in the history of humanity. And so I think you talk about, well, Bible's a stuffy old book. I think it's actually the most relevant document today. And so, that's just my quick POV. I am hopeful. I am optimistic. I am excited about the next generation. And I think there will be a leader, and hopefully a whole cohort of leaders that are given birth to in this season that we've been in over the last year and a half, that are coming out of a struggle, that are going to breathe new life into what it means to fall in love with Jesus. And so I'm excited about that. And I think, I think the next generation is bright. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, Paul, we couldn't agree more. And just really coming out of a pandemic and
Right.
recognizing the desperation for community, for connectedness outside of the social realms. I mean, social media realms when I say that. And we work with so many young adults, so many students, even lead pastors, really evaluating who are my friends, who are the people I'm leading, who are my lifelong friends, how are we doing life? Are we doing life well? Are we, symbolizing that through sharing of meals, traveling together, like the disciples did with Jesus, and really evaluating that. And I always tell young adults, and I'm like, you guys, the Bible is one of the most epic things you can ever read. And here's why. If you like drama, if you like battles, if you like war, if you like murder, affairs, whatever, I'm like, it is all in there. Anything that you put on your Netflix device or Netflix or anything that you're watching, there are so many different stories when it comes to the Bible, but they always point back to God. They always point back to Christ. And I think that's what they're looking for. They're looking for a savior. They're looking for purpose. They're looking to wake up with purpose, I think is the biggest thing that we really recognize these last 18 months is, what's the point of me getting dressed for the day? What's the point of me getting, out of bed? What's the point of me, fill in the blank? And many of them have discovered true and real kind of crazy friendships of connecting through social media.
Totally.
So social media can be a phenomenal tool. And we know a lot of leaders, whether the pastors or just leaders, or maybe even like my parents' generation, if you're 55 plus, and kind of, this whole stream of media has kind of swept, every generation below them, and they shy away from it. My mom, you guys, okay, for the listener, my mom literally has a flip phone from when I went off to college. I graduated high school in 2005. So her phone is literally from 2005 and it still works. She's working at the store and this kid is like, what is that? She's like, it's my phone. He's like, no way. So I was just so curious of what would you say, or how would you encourage like this generation who kind of shies away from social media because they maybe view it as a dark place, a toxic place. There's depression, there's anxiety, there's nasty things, and they only hear that. But why is it important that as we as Christ followers maybe have or take the opportunity to use that to leverage God's kingdom, to be a light in a so-called dark place, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc.? Like, how do we encourage them to get involved and be a part of the story versus kind of just shy away and hide under the rock?
Yeah. I think flip phones are coming back, by the way. I think they're going to make a comeback at some point. So your mom may be like, she might just be ahead of the curve. We don't know it.
Stuck in the past and just ride the next wave, right?
Yeah, I think there's when you think about just this hesitancy to maybe jump in on social media, I think we just need to get used to the idea that not everyone is going to love you. And but at the core of what we're all trying to do, it actually has nothing to do with us. And so, so I think perhaps some of the reason why some people are hesitant to post, or why there's like a reluctance to share that thought or connect with someone on social media, there might be a very functional, I don't know how to use technology, but there also might be this sense of like, I'm worried what other people are going to say about me. I'm worried what they're going to think of me.
Yeah.
So we have to get past that. I think we have to get past this idea of worrying that people are going to think weird of you. They will. And I think it's just, that's like, let's just stop worrying about ourselves and what other people think of us. We have to be bold and courageous, and really get honest with, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to build our own platform, or are we trying to build, point to Jesus and point to God? And so I think if we look at Jesus and his life, where he spent time, he spent time in the streets, he spent time in the bars, he spent time with people that, the religious leaders at the time kind of said, whoa, dude, you are like hanging out with people I'm not sure I like. But that's where the power was. And I think that's where, his light became so much more profound the darker it was. And, I hear a lot of Christians talk about, the darkness that's in the world. It's so dark. There's a lot of unhappy Christians walking around with how dark things are. And I kind of just don't get that, if I'm being honest, because, like our assignment here on earth is to be the light, is to wake up and shine. And I think if we're not prepared to go do that in some of the darkest places of the world, then, like we're missing out on the purpose and the calling that God has for our life. So, and, if Jesus said, I'm going to turn you into fishers of men, like let's think about, where are the fish? The fish are conversing on social media. And so I think we got to be prepared to, drop some nets down into that area, and just be well versed in the way conversations are unfolding and the way people are communicating in today's world. And that's going to change in 10 years. It's going to it's not going to stay the same. And so, but we are called to be in the world, not of the world. And I think it does allow us to be the light in those dark places. So I get excited by that. I get excited about being able to jump into those conversations. And there is an element of, once you are able to connect, I think, with people and relate to people and understand kind of their view of the world and how they're communicating and what they're all about, only once that happens, can you actually, be effective in communicating to people. And I think this all gets back to not trying to come in with an agenda, trying to come in where you're actually genuinely loving people, and you're trying to just care for them and learn about them and have a conversation with them. And, in the real world, we might go have a coffee, and in the social world, online world, it might look like a DM chat, or, commenting on a post, or a little few words of encouragement. It might actually change the course of someone's day, maybe even their life.
Right.
And so I think there's power in some of the little things that we could do every day in social media. And so, I think we need to be bold and courageous, and stop worrying what other people think of us, and just, jump in there. And if it's not that, like, if we're not going to do that, then if we're not waking up every day to be the light, then, what are we doing? What are we doing with our time?
Paul, I love that. I get excited about this conversation as well. Naturally, I think it's just maybe part of who I am, or God's unique wiring and design. But I love cups of coffee, by the way, and just hanging out with people. I'm an extrovert, and so love doing that in real life. And I loved that illustration of how that's what it looks like across the table. But on social media, it might be a thread or a couple comments or a DM chat. I think just retraining our minds to redefine maybe how we think relationships start or form or continue. And with that, I think that what I saw personally the past year and a half, 12 to 18 months, is churches, many of them, and leaders use social media as kind of a promotional outlet or tool to share about their upcoming launches or events or services or ministries. And that's great. There's a component of promotion with online and digital. And then also, but it was really interesting to watch it become more of a pastoral tool. as people could actually, well, with the pandemic and everyone's at home, there almost every church began a live stream and all these different opportunities. But what would maybe be some practical steps for the church leader listening who has that vacant social media account that they're occupying it, they've got their domain, so to speak, but if they wanted to maybe engage in some conversation or begin dialoguing or testing the water, so to speak, and also maybe could you cast a little vision of how technology and digital spaces like Twitter could be a way that churches, leaders, and ministries could share the gospel and their faith?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. I think, um, you don't have to boil the ocean to do this right. And I think sometimes we're worried that we're putting something out into the world and it's got to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect. And in fact, if the pandemic has taught us anything with Zoom calls, like we're living in a world of imperfection and we're getting a window into everyone's real world. And so it's embrace imperfection. It's a beautiful quality. It does not need to be perfectly curated. Embrace the raw, gritty a camera on your mom's flip phone to take the images. Like sometimes the grittier and the more real, the better. Don't try and make it, overly polished. I think just, social media is a conversation. And far too often we use it as a one-way dialogue. We're broadcasting out a message to the world. And I do think we miss this opportunity to actually listen and engage with people in the comments section. When people post something, dropping in and actually just commenting on it. Hey, great to see you. Great to see your face. Like little moments like that, just that you're thinking of people. It's about having and establishing a relationship with people. And candidly, if there are people that you are connected with on social media, I make it a purposeful intention to comment on my team's posts all the time. I celebrate their birthdays publicly. I celebrate their anniversaries publicly.
Yes.
I comment on the little things that mean something when they share a photo of their child. I'm just sending hearts and sending hugs. Like little things. Just again, you don't have to have this perfectly polished, biblical statement that captures the hearts and minds of millions of people. You could just say, hey, thinking about you and I love you. And so I think we sometimes overcomplicate it and over heighten the expectations of what this needs to be. It can be really simple. And I think just, do lots of it and do it in micro doses. I think it's helpful. So I think, for leaders trying to leverage Twitter and to try and make sense of social media platforms. And I think that, a lot of this is just experimenting and having a strategy for it. Actually thinking about what do you want to communicate? How frequently should you communicate? What is the cadence of communication? How do you want to be listening? Far too less often, if that's a way to say this, people are using social media to listen. And I love it when people are asking questions. What do you think about insert topic here? It's a great focus group for people to listen and understand how people are perceiving and acknowledging and thinking about a topic that they may be unsure of how to express publicly. So I think for a lot of pastors and for a lot of people who are, stewards of others, great a way to get feedback and a pulse check on the way your community is thinking about a topic. Is this important or is this important? Throw out a couple options. What do you want to hear about? What do you want to talk about? What's on your mind? What's pressing? I also think that where I see pastors and leaders do a great job is not necessarily trying to have all the answers, but being able to facilitate a conversation with a bunch of diverse voices about a topic.
Wow.
And that is a great start. Acknowledging that some of these conversations are heavy and challenging and not easy. There's no binary one-way answer to some of these questions or topics. But if Christ is the way we view the world and how we make sense of the world, let's talk about that. How are we all making sense of this thing that's happening in our world right now? And I think it's the more we talk about these things, the more we talk about them publicly, the more transparent we can become in how we're wrestling with some issues, I think the more people will engage and be open that we don't have to have all the answers. The more we keep it hidden and behind closed doors and private, I think the less open it becomes for people to engage in perhaps some of the most meaningful conversations we might have in our lifetime. So I just think like, let's just add another stick to the fire and just keep talking. And I think that's how I would encourage leaders to think about social media. Don't think of it as a one-stop shop broadcast. Think of it a two-way conversation, a permanent fire that you're just adding sticks every once in a while.
Beautiful picture.
Yeah, Paul, I think that's so good. Even as a leader to recognize like who's the audience. You know, if my congregation is all 80 people, 80 plus in ages for the most part, and there's a couple young adults or families sprinkled throughout, the 80-year-old probably is not going to pick up their phone and start a Twitter account. They're probably not going to, some of them don't even have internet. And then you have those hip old, I call them the salt of the earth, the older grandmas and grandpas who are just like have smartphones before their grandkids. So it's so fun to see just like the different people that we get to reach through social media. And we know that we can meet young and old alike and create a safe place where they can process things that are happening in the world. And if we can be leaders and pastors and examples of loving like Christ through the word of God, through the lens of Christ on social media, well, then we're just going to glorify God in that process. And we're going to kind of pivot gears here real quick. But Paul, I would love to hear just your opinion or just how you feel about just the next generation and why you believe that young adult ministry is important.
Yeah, I think young adult ministry is important because it is in many ways planting seeds for the next, not just one generation, but many, many generations. And so I think your time horizon needs to be longer than, the young adult cohort that we think of as an age bracket. We are planting seeds and building families and structuring, future generations times 10. And so I think when we think about it generationally and the impact that it can have, I think it's one individual actually means potentially 1,000. And so I think it's just a powerful, the role is a multiplied role, and the role of impact is multiplied. And I think God is a God of multiplication, and he wants to multiply the impact. And so I would never want us to think about, the young generation as an isolated, independent, finite thing. It's we are building families by focusing on this generation. We are building, grandchildren. We are building generational impact, and I think that just gets me excited when I think about it that way.
Good.
Same here. We're young parents. We've been married 4 years. We have a 14-month-old daughter at the time of recording this, and then 6 weeks away from the next little one to join us in our family of the next.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. But when you say it like that, of we're building families, it makes me think of our college students that we're connecting with at gatherings and weekly small groups and just special events, and just the potential of a future marriage, the potential of their kids, their grandkids. And it's crazy to think about, because it all goes so fast too. So I love that answer. And Paul, we want to tap into 5 final thoughts. We call it the 5 and 5, kind of rapid fire, almost like a home run derby for the sports fans out there. And are you up for that challenge, by the way?
Let's do it. I'm in. I'm ready.
You want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll kick us off. If you could describe yourself in 3 words or maybe 280 characters or less, or 1 tweet, if you could describe yourself in 1 tweet, what would it be?
Well, I will use my my Twitter bio that I think you already used, but believer, builder, maker, dreamer, husband, father, and I'll add another one, son. So yeah, that's perhaps a good description of me.
All right, here's a fun one. This is off script. This came to my mind while you were just talking. Okay, and this is your opinion, so we don't have to get theologically sound on this by any means. But if Jesus had Twitter, what do you think he would say?
I think if Jesus had Twitter, I think he would be doing a lot of listening. I could see the Sermon on the Mount being streamed live via Twitter. I could, I could see him just dropping into people's DMs with a, "Hey, I love you. I'm thinking about you today." I could see, I could see him not being too concerned with his follower count. But people would be so attracted to what he's got to say and what he's got to offer, even though they couldn't understand why. I don't know. Those might be a few thoughts.
That's
Oh
fun.
my gosh, that's
12
inspiring to me.
friends, but a million views, billions of views.
That's good. I just picture too, like questions seem to do really well on Twitter, and Jesus was like known as this rabbi who taught through asking questions. So that's kind of fun to just imagine. Dream. Great question. Speaking of questions, Paul, if you could ask Micah and I anything, one question, what would you ask us?
What are you hoping for, both of you?
What are we hoping for? I think in the ministry world and the call on our life is kind of a theme that we experienced this last young adult conference that we were able to host back in March.
Yeah, March.
Oh my gosh, time's going so fast. And it is breakthrough miracle power, that everybody that we come in contact with, that we take the presence of God with us, that we tap into the Holy Spirit, knowing that the Spirit that raised Christ from the dead is within us and has that same power to experience the healing miracles that were seen in the Bible, as well as relevant for today. The breakthrough of anxiety and depression and family trees being changed. So I just think breakthrough, miracle, power are the three words that we've kind of been honing in on and focusing on, as well as just praying to this next school year that we're stepping into. And it's hold nothing back, to live a bold life dedicated to Christ, hands down, to what God has, and, just be ready for the battlefield, that I don't want to be a spectator on the sideline, and I don't want to raise children that are spectators on the sideline. I want them to have skin in the game, skin in the kingdom for God, and to live that out, as well as anybody that comes across our ministry. So those are some things I've been praying in and through and just declaring, but also like desiring for others. So I can't make it their desire, but I can definitely pray that it could be.
I love it, man. It's hard to top that because that's just our heart. Micah, you articulated that so well, from breakthrough miracle power to holding nothing back. I think the thing that God's teaching me most, Paul, right now, that I'm hoping to grow in is fear not. I'm 29 years old, and there's things that still intimidate me, that I'm afraid about maybe what people would think if I said this, or afraid to talk to that person because what if they ghost me or don't, whatever it may be. But I guess I think God's just really teaching me to have the same Spirit that Christ rose, from the grave. That same Spirit lives in me. And so I don't need to be timid or shy or hold back or be fearful or wait, because life goes so fast. So I guess I'm just hoping to make the most of life here on earth in a way that points the next generation to Jesus.
It's good.
So that they can know the goodness of God in the land of the living. So
that's a great question, Paul. Did we answer well?
You did. Yeah.
Okay. Well, enough for today. Okay, the next one's mine, right?
Yes.
All right, question number 4. We love to learn from leaders, and our listeners love this question probably just as much as we do, because we just want to learn, and sometimes we get a laugh, and sometimes we get really serious in this next question. So, Paul, would you be willing to tell us about one of your epic failures that you've experienced in life, family, leadership, and just expound on that quickly for us?
Yeah. So I'll give you one from life and one from my professional experience. So in life, I would say I fail multiple times an hour, if not, I'm probably failing right now. But my wife and I, like any marriage, when there's important stuff to talk about, we'll fight about those things invariably. Or my kids will have a difficult confrontation about a topic or an issue. And so and I think what I've learned to do in those moments when there's tension in a relationship, when there's pressure being put on a relationship is to really acknowledge where my focus is. Is my focus on me? Is my focus on my own well-being? Am I getting offended? Which is a way of just me thinking about me, or am I really thinking about trying to understand the other person?
Mhm.
And I think what I've learned in all of this is the number one step is just to seek to understand. And so I'm trying to pause and just trying to let me understand what I hear you saying. I found that to be a really valuable step when I miss it on a on a relationship front. Seek to understand first. On the professional side, one of the things we do at Twitter is we've got this thing called Chapter F, and Chapter F is a weekly. Failure used to be this like bad word that we only celebrated successes, and so Chapter F is this thing we do every week where someone talks about a failure, what they learned from it, and how they're actually how it was a valuable experience. And so instead of like chastising them for the failed attempt, we're rewarding them that they gave it a shot. We're trying to highlight the attempt. They swung for the fences and they missed. That's okay. I'm glad you went for it. So that's something we've tried to put into play here.
That's amazing. That is really inspiring. And Paul, just as we wrap up, like if there was one thing that you could maybe encourage a young adult pastor, a campus missionary or campus ministry leader working with college students, investing their lives in the next generation, how would you encourage them, or what one piece of advice would you have for them today?
Yeah. Well, first, I would just want to thank them for everything that they're doing, because they are shaping and building and nurturing the next generation. They're planting seeds today that will be sequoias tomorrow. And so I think it is probably the most incredible work to pour Christ into the lives of future leaders. And so thank you is the thing I would say to this group. And I think just keep going. That there's going to be 1.5 million distractions and reasons to stop, but you are building a legacy through the work you're doing today. Even though it may feel arduous and small, you're building a legacy for the next 10 generations. So thank you.
That's great. Well, Paul, you said it well for the listener today. Keep going. You're building things today that you're not going to necessarily see tomorrow, but those seeds are being planted. You're doing a great work, and don't come down from it. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me here today. It was so fun. Loved meeting you both and chatting with you both.
So fun.
What a great conversation. We got to tune in with Paul today. And thank you so much for joining us. You can find out more about Paul Burns and #TwitterFaith when you connect with us on our website, www.youngadults.today, as well as our social media platforms across the board at youngadults.today. Until next time, this is Micah and Josiah signing off.
Thanks so much.